Here's a question for you. How many objects do I have here? You might think the answer is obvious, but what if I told you it wasn't? Allow me to introduce someone. You just want me to count them. 6. Show me you're working. Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Try again. Don't count any more than once. Alright, I still think the answer is 6 though. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Try again. Start from 1. Sure you don't want me to count from 0? That seems like maybe it might be the more natural way of...
Just start from 1.
Alright. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4.
Make sure you count all the objects.
Oh, count all the objects. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I said count all the objects.
I did count all the objects. I just don't personally consider anything green to be an object. Can you believe that guy? And my therapist tells me I should be kind to myself. Now, obviously, you wouldn't count things in the same way that that guy tried to count these. But it does reveal that we actually make a lot of assumptions about what we mean when we say to count. We all have an intuitive idea of what it means to count something, and if you've seen my last video, you know just how difficult it can be to overcome that intuition to develop a formal mathematical description. So, how do mathematicians count? You can count on this video to find out.
Get out of here.
Alright. So, allow me to teach you how to count. And when I say count, I mean count in the numerical sense. I don't mean count as in matter. I can't teach you how to matter because you don't matter. Nothing matters. Now, what I love about counting is just how easy it seems. Here's a fun story about me, and this is true. When I was very young, before I can even remember, my older brother taught me how to count. He got as far as 60 and then didn't tell me what came next. Even though it's kind of obvious, right? You've got 40, 41, 50, 51, 60. It's a mystery. Apparently I just couldn't figure it out. Who would have thought I was destined to become a mathematician? Well, I prefer the version of the story where, even as an infant, I simply didn't want to assume what the next number was, because making erroneous assumptions is the easiest mathematical blunder one can commit. I mean, for all I knew, our number system was like the French one. Now, I spent a long time in my last video praising French ingenuity and how it laid the foundation of modern metrology by creating a universal system of measurements in the metric system, but come on, you've got 40, 50, 60, 60, 10, 420, 420, 10? Are you kidding me, France? But there is some charm in that number system because it highlights how arbitrary the labels are. What matters is the ordering and the structure. Now, we're going to use the number system that I defined in my last video, and we're going to use a lot of the steps that we built in order to get there in this video. So if you haven't seen my last video, I highly recommend that you do so now. I mean, we all laughed at that guy when he started counting from 2, right? So don't start from video number 2. Go and watch the first one. Okay, welcome back. From this point on, I'm going to assume that you've seen that last video. Now, you probably realized while watching it that I mentioned counting quite a few times. That's if you weren't distracted by all the cake. Cake. Gâteau. Now, I did mention counting in my last video, and that was to motivate the construction of the numbers. So I had this canonical 3 set, for example, and I could use this to count the number of pencils that I have here. So I took each member of this canonical number 3, and I assigned each member to one of these pencils, thereby concluding that I've got 3 pencils. And that's fine, but I want to formalize the process of matching numbers to collections of things in this video, because there are some questions that are left hanging open here. Does it matter which set I assign to which pencil? Does that change the outcome? And even worse, what if our friend from before came up with a matching from this canonical 2 set to this collection of pencils, and he was utterly convinced that he had done nothing wrong? Not to get all Winston Smith on you, but imagine if everyone in the world was convinced that there was a true matching from the canonical 2 set to this set of pencils. Would that mean that we genuinely have 2 pencils? How would we know whether we had done something wrong? You see, when we line things up like this, either side by side or one atop the other, we're just using our intuitive understanding of lining things up. But this is a process which I think, like most processes, could use more rigor. Remember Galileo's paradox, where I'm trying to decide which collection is bigger, the set of all integers or the set of all even integers? If I line them up like this, where every even integer is paired with its duplicate in the integers, then you can see that the collection of integers must be bigger, because all the odd integers don't have a partner. But line them up like this, pairing every integer to its double in the even integers, and now every number has a partner. So this shows that both collections must have the same size. So which one is it? Well, I mentioned in the last video that this does have an answer. We're going to discover it before the end of this video. Before we get there, let's remind ourselves of our current mathematical foundation. We have pairing, the notion that if two things exist, I can form the set containing those two things. Union, the notion that if two sets exist, then I can form the union of those two sets, i.e. the set that contains everything that the first two sets contain. Subsets, given a set that already exists, I can form a set containing some of the elements of that first set. And finally we have extensionality. Two sets are equal if they contain identical elements. Now, last video I also had the axiom of regularity. Don't worry about it. Now, we did also have the singleton rule, the idea that if something exists, I can form the set containing that thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to collapse that rule together with pairing and say that given any number of things that exist, I can form the set containing those things. Let me just give you a quick explanation as to why I'm justified in doing that. So if I have any number of things, I've got 3 here, but it works for any number, then I can form the set containing those things using the singleton rule, but then by union, I can form the union of the first two sets. So everything that the first two sets contains, get in there. And then I can create the union of these two sets. Honestly. And so I've got the set containing the 3 things that I started with. We're also, in this video, not really going to use the subsets rule. So let me just get rid of that to give my elbows room to breathe. Now, before we get lost in the infinite sets of Galileo's paradox, let's prove something a little bit more modest. Let's try to prove that these two sets are the same size. Now, when I use letters like this, A, B, and C, and so on, I just mean anything that we currently know exists, I can assign this letter. So this could be the empty set, for example, or it could be something else that we've constructed using our axioms. I'm just using notation like this as a kind of shorthand. We're also going to assume that when we have a diagram like this, that all 3 of these elements are distinct from each other. So how might I prove that these two sets are the same size? Well, we're going to do it like we had before, where I have a sort of matchup process where I can match up A to D, for example, and then I can match up the other elements as well. So every element in here is matched to exactly one element in here, thereby proving that both sets are the same size. That's what we want to be able to do. But there's nothing in our axioms that says that we can just line the elements up like this, that we can just draw these arrows, that we can just like put them in some kind of order. And that's a problem. So our first step is going to be in turning these arrows into concrete objects. Objects that we can create using the rules that we've specified so far. Let me give you the gist of how we are going to do that. So instead of drawing these arrows, what I can do is I could just place the elements side by side. So I've not had to create anything new here, and then somehow have an object that represents the pairing of A with D. So if I have A and D, elements that already exist, I can place them into a set using the pairing rule. And so I have a set that represents the start of my matching from one set to another. And I could do that with all the pairs. So I now have a collection of sets that encode the way that I've lined up the elements here. And this is a good start, but there is a problem with this approach, and it can be summed up thusly. How do I know when I have succeeded in a matching between these two sets? Let me show you an example where this fails to illustrate what I mean. Let's try to prove that these two sets have the same number of elements. Obviously we're going to fail here, but the reason why we failed is what is important. So just bear with me for a second here. So what we did before was we matched the sets together like this, kind of lining the elements up, and then we matched A to D, pairing the elements together into their own set. Then we matched B to E, pairing them off. And then we're stuck with C, which doesn't have a partner. So what do I do? Well, what we could do is we just have C and nothing else. So what that could represent is failure. We have failed to adequately match these elements together because we're stuck with this singleton here. Now, let me show you the first problem with this. What if now I try to prove that these two sets have the same size? So instead of having D and E in the set B, I have D, E, and C in the set B. Well, then what we would do at the end here is we would pair A with D, B with E, C would then get paired to C. And so we've completed our matching. What's wrong with that? Well, remember, by extensionality, this set is actually the same as this set here. So here we have a successful matching which contains a singleton. So earlier we said, well, the fact that we have an element all by itself here indicates failure that we've managed to match the elements together. Here we've got a successful matching that has the singleton, so we don't have a good way of telling whether or not we've succeeded. Now you might say, okay, that's fine, just change the order for how the elements are paired. So you could match A to C, B to E, C to D, for example, and then you've avoided this problem. And yeah, that's fine, we have avoided the problem, but wherever we can, we want to remove choice from the picture. You know, if we're trying to prove that these sets are the same size, we'd like to be able to do it without always insisting on our personal preference for how the matching is obtained. The problems don't end there either. Look at this. Imagine I'm trying to show that these two sets are equal. Well, now I can pair A to, not to D, but to B, and I can pair B with A, and I'm still stuck with that C paired with C issue, but there's another problem here. The set containing A and B is the same thing as the set containing B and A. So actually our matching now devolves into this. So we've got a legitimate matching that only contains two sets, one of which doesn't even look like a matching. So what's going on here? Well, problems arise when we have identical elements in each of our sets. So we have an A here and an A here, for example, and it's causing these sorts of issues. The problem is that in our matchings, there's no way for this set to tell whether A has come from set A or whether A has come from set B. Ideally, what we would want is some kind of ordering so that we could tell these sets, okay, your first element has come from the first set and the second element has come from the second set. The problem with that is that, by extensionality, sets are defined only by their elements. Order doesn't matter. These sets are identical because they contain the same things. So AB is the same as BA. There's no ordering there. So what we need to do is use our rules to come up with a way of ordering these elements. There are many ways of doing this, some of them very elegant, but the one I'm going to use today is, instead of pairing A with B straight away, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pair A with the number 1. Remember, we created the numbers in the last video, so we've got them, we might as well use them. And then we'll use pairing to put them into a set. So far, I've got the set containing A and 1. Let's now take the element I want to pair A with, B. I'm going to pair B with 2. So now I have the set containing B and 2. And then I can use pairing to put these two into a set. So let's do that. So here I have the set containing A and 1, and the set containing B and 2. And hey presto, I have now constructed a set where the order matters. And by order, I mean there's a way that's encoding which is first and which is second. Even if I swap these sets around or swap the individual elements around, I say that the element which is first is the one that belongs in the set that's paired with 1. And the element that is second is the one that belongs in one of these sets, and that's the one that's paired with 2. So the ordering doesn't matter, but the ordering is encoded in the structure of this set. It's also worth pointing out that if I now pair B with A, then I had that problem where the set containing b and a is the same as the set containing a and b. But now look, I have b from the first set, so I pair that with 1, and a from the second set, so I pair that with 2. And this whole set is distinct from this whole set. This one contains the set containing a and 1, which this one does not contain, so they are necessarily distinct. Switching the order of the elements genuinely changes this set. So this really does encode the ordering. And just for completeness, it also solves that last problem. Pairing C with itself caused that issue where if I tried to create the set containing C and C, it just kind of collapsed into the set containing C. But now I have C and 1 with the set C and 2 all bunched together, and this doesn't collapse because these two are distinct sets. So I've really encoded C paired with itself as well as solving all these other issues here. Now, one issue that does arise here is what if the set A contains the number 1? Well, then I'd be pairing 1 with 1 when I build one of these sets, and it creates one of those awkward singletons again. But we're just gonna kind of ignore that problem because I've chosen 1 and 2 here, but that's pretty arbitrary, you know. I'm just tagging which elements has come from the first set and which elements has come from the second set, and the easiest way to do that is with the numbers 1 and 2. But I could have chosen any numbers, you know. I could have chosen 18 and 98, or as the French say, 420, 18. But you know, any numbers or anything that tags this as a member of this set and this is a member of this set will work. And given any set, I can always find an element that doesn't belong in there, so I'll use that as the tag. So I hope that convinces you that that's not a problem that's worth worrying about. What is a problem is how annoying this notation has become. Mathematicians have a reputation for being lazy, and it's true. So instead of writing out this whole thing, what I want is a way of just saying A and B, and they are in a set, and the order matters. So instead of using the curly brackets, what I do is I just use the regular brackets, and from now on I'll use this to represent this. It's the set containing A and B where the order matters. So it's distinct from BA. It might look familiar, looks kind of like coordinates, right? And there's a reason for that. It's the same sort of thing. You know, you're taking one number from one axis and another number from another axis, and the order matters. You know, if you imagine 2, 5, that is distinct from 5, 2. But as usual, this is just shorthand for something that I can construct using these axioms. So from now on, I'll add ordered pairs to the things that I can construct on this foundation. Now, don't forget why we were doing this. We were doing it as a way of encoding these arrows as concrete objects. So I'm going to use diagrams like this for the rest of the video with these arrows because they are very helpful. But what they actually are is an ordered pair such that the first entry in the pair is from the first set and the second entry from the pair is from the second set. So just bear that in mind. The diagrams are all well and good, but we have to always ensure that they are encoding something concrete, which they are. So if we take all of these arrows together, or in other words, we bunch all of the pairs together into a single set, then we obtain a complete map from the first set to the second set. Whoever you are in the first set, you know which element you are matched with in the second set, just by looking at this set down here. For example, if you are the element B in this first set, then you look for the pair that contains B as its first entry, which is this one, and then the second entry tells you where you're going, which is to A, which is this element here. And because we have a complete map from one set to another, this set here has a very special name. We call it a map. I'm just kidding, we call it a function, although map is sometimes used. Now, in a function, the pairs will always be written in this order, with the first entry from the first set and the second entry from the second set. But it also must satisfy the golden rule of all functions. Now, the golden rule says that every element in the starting set must have a clear instruction for where to go in the destination set. So, this collection here is not a valid function because this guy does not have instructions for where to go. And this is also not a valid function, because if you're this guy, you don't have clear instructions for where to go in the destination set. The function is trying to map you to two different elements, and that's not allowed. It doesn't meet our golden rule. But note that this is a valid function, because even though two elements in A are being mapped to the same thing in B, it doesn't matter. The point is that every element in the starting set has a clear instruction for where to go in the destination set. It still satisfies that golden rule. In the language of these pairs, every element in the first set must appear as a first entry once and only once. Only then do we have a valid function. And as usual, since a function is something that we can create using these rules, let's add it to our wall of theory. So hopefully you can see where this is going. Counting is going to be a matter of drawing up some kind of function from the counting numbers to the collection that we're trying to count. That's where we're going. And just a quick heads up, before the end of the video, we'll be adding a few more bricks to our wall here, and I'm going to throw a few more mathematical definitions at you. So if you want to take a break, now would be a good time. But make sure you come back, it'll be worth it, I promise. Now, really quickly, just while we're on a short break, when I'm not making videos, I am actually a full-time maths teacher. I love to teach. It's why I started making videos in the first place, to reach more people who are curious and want to learn about mathematics. Now, I have actually taken a part-time role that starts next academic year, and I'm hoping to use that free time to make more videos. But it does come with quite a hefty pay cut, so if you like what I'm doing and want to see more, please consider supporting me. You'll find my Patreon link down below. If you're not able to do that, don't worry about it. Subscribe and share the video. That would really help me as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Let's get to it. So for this next part, we're going to use sets A and B. And I want you to imagine that we don't really know how big these sets are, how many elements are in each. So I want you to imagine that we've zoomed in on each set, and we're just going to look at a few elements at a time. Now I'm going to draw a function from A to B. I'm going to use these arrows. And remember, I can't draw all of the arrows because I don't know how many elements are in these sets. But the arrows that I do draw, I want you to imagine kind of represents the function as a whole. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So when you look at that, I've drawn up a function from A to B. It's a valid function. It satisfies the golden rule. Every element of A has one place where it goes. And I'm going to make it a very special type of function now. I'm going to make it the type of function where if two elements start in a different place, then they must finish in a different place. So it's going to look something a little bit more like this, where if they start different, they end different. And this is a very special type of function. And apologies to the trypanophobic amongst you, but we call it an injection. So check your intuition here. If it is possible to draw up an injective function, what does that tell us about the relative sizes of these sets? We don't know how big they are. One might be bigger than the other, or they might be the same size. All we know is that it's possible to create this injective function. So when we are choosing elements of B to assign the elements of A to, then we are never in a situation where we have to repeat an element of B. And that must mean that B is either larger or it's the same size as A. Think about it, if B was smaller, then we run out of elements and we'd have to send two different elements of A to the same element in B. So it is the case that A is smaller than or equal to B if we can set up an injective function. And in fact, that's how we define less than or equal to in relation to sets. So the size of A is less than or equal to the size of B if an injection exists. Let's get that down on our wall. I'm just going to shuffle this around a little bit, not that it really matters, because all in all it's just another brick in the body of mathematical knowledge. Let's look at another class of function now. So I've got a function from A to B, perfectly valid function, and now I'm going to change it to make it a special type of function. And this is going to be the type of function that hits everything in B. So every element of B must be mapped to by something in A. So it hits everything in B, and we call it a surjection, named after Alfred Jection, after he achieved his knighthood back in... Is that really the joke I want to go with here? That is terrible. We call it a surjection. Now, check your intuition again here. imagine we've got these sets A and B, and imagine that it is possible to draw up a function from A to B that hits everything in B. Well, that must mean we've got an abundance of elements in A. And in fact, that's how we define that the size of A is greater than or equal to the size of B if a surjection exists. Let's get the brick. And there we have it. This is fun, isn't it? On to the last class of function, arguably the most important. Unfortunately, we don't actually need any new concepts in order to define this one, because all we're going to do is we make a function that's an injection and a surjection. So it's an injection, which means that any two elements that start in a different place finish in a different place, and it's a surjection, which means that everything in B gets hit. And we call this a bijection. And again, check your intuition here. If it's an injection, that means that the size of A is less than or equal to the size of B. And if it's a surjection, then that means that the size of A is greater than or equal to the size of B. So it can't be the case that A is less than and greater than the size of B, so it must be the case that they are the exact same size. So a bijective correspondence is where all the elements line up perfectly one-to-one, and there's nothing left over in B. That's a bijection. Let's get that down. So, two sets have the same size if a bijection exists between them. What does that have to do with counting? Everything. Let me show you. So I'm going to set up a bijection from the counting numbers to my collection here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and so on. And I want to make sure I don't count anything twice. So I don't want a function like this where I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So my function needs to be an injection. Every number goes to its own thing. And I want to make sure I count all the objects. I don't want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just give up. So I need to make sure my function is a surjection. So if my function's an injection and a surjection, that's what I call a bijection. So that's why I have a bijective correspondence from my counting numbers to these objects. The only thing that we usually do differently is instead of starting our count from 1, we usually start counting from 0. And why is that? Well, think back to last video. We had 0 that was defined to be the empty set, 1 was defined to be the set containing 0, 2 was the set containing 1 and 0, and so on. So 5 is defined to be the set containing the numbers 0 to 4. So I have a bijection from the number 5 to this collection here. So the 5 set and this set have the same size. So we can safely say there are 5 elements here. Now there's one last realm of doubt that we need to explore, and that's that situation that I had before where I had 3 pencils and then somebody thought that they had formed a bijection from the 2 set to that set of pencils, and we asked, well, does that mean that we actually have 2 pencils? Well, this is worth exploring. Imagine I have some absolutely horrible set X. Let's call it set X, because it's bad, I guess. And then let's say we have a bijection from the standard canonical set N, where N is just some number that we've built using our rules of sets. And now let's imagine that we have a bijection from a different number, K. So in other words, we've counted the elements of this set X and got N, and then we've counted them in a different way and we've got K. What would happen then? There is an amazing line about this in the excellent book, An Introduction to Mathematical Reasoning by Peter Eccles, who incidentally was one of my professors when I studied at university. He says this: surely it is absolutely obvious that the number of elements in a set is a well-defined notion, and 2 different orders of counting cannot lead to a different answer. At this point, the reader may consider that the author has taken leave of his senses. Mathematics isn't just about formalizing, it's about truth. And if we want to prove something is an absolutely irrefutable fact, it requires proof. And this is something we can prove, that we can't count the same set and get 2 different answers. So let's do that. Okay, I've brought my sets back here because in order to prove the thing we want, we're going to require 2 extra facts, and we're going to use those as stepping stones to get to the result that we want. So I've got a bijection here, and I'm going to do something with it that I can only do with bijections. What I can do is I can reverse the arrows. So I call this the inverse function, where I take everything back where it started. And why does it need to be a bijection? Well, imagine the original function wasn't a surjection. So it looked something like this, where not everything in B got hit by the original function. Well, now when I reverse the arrows, the inverse function doesn't satisfy the golden rule, because now this guy doesn't know where to go. So our original function needs to hit everything in B, so that when we reverse the arrows, everything in B has somewhere to go. And our original function needs to be an injection, because if I had a situation like this, where my function wasn't an injection, now when I reverse the arrows, I've got one element that's trying to go to two different places. So our original function needs to be a bijection in order to create this inverse, and this inverse is itself a bijection, because it's just the same function but in reverse order. And this result is important enough to warrant its own brick over here. So, inverses. Okay, and the final fact we need, and I know it looks horrendous, but bear with me. So let's say I've got three sets now, A, B, and C. And let's say I've got a bijection from A to B. And let's say I've got a bijection from B to C. Now what my next claim says is that I can take the shortcut function from A to C, kind of skipping out B altogether, and that this new pink function, this shortcut function, is a bijection. And why is that? Well, we can prove it. First, let's prove that the pink function is an injection. That is, if I pick two elements in A that are different, then they finish in different places in C. Well, if I pick two different elements in A, then through the green function, because the green function is a bijection, it must take those to two different places. And now the yellow function, because that's a bijection, that must take these two things to two different places in C. So the overall shortcut function, given any two elements that are different in A, will send them to two different places in C. So our overall pink function is an injection. Why is it a surjection? Well, if I pick a random element in C, I need to make sure the pink function hits it. And why is that? Well, whatever random element of C that I pick, I know that the yellow function hits it, so I can find something in B that maps to that element in C. So I've got my hands on an element in B, but now because the green function is a bijection, there must be an element in A that maps to it. So I've got an element in A that maps to this thing in B that then maps to the random thing that I picked in C, and I picked any element of C. So given any element of C, we can trace back and find an element in A that will eventually hit it. So our pink function overall is a surjection, and if it's overall an injection and a surjection, it is a bijection. So just to summarize, because I know there's a lot going on in this very chaotic diagram, if I've got a bijection from A to B and a bijection from B to C, then the overall shortcut function from A to C is a bijection. And it's so important that we've got a brick for it, and because we have composed, we don't call it a subset at all, because we have combined or composed two functions together, the composition of the green and yellow functions, we call this a composite function, or the composition of two functions. So the composition of two bijections is a bijection. So, ready for the grand finale? We had this situation before where we have this set X, which has this awful property that we have a bijection from the N set to X and a bijection from the K set to X. So in other words, we've counted the number of elements that X has and got N, then we've counted them again and got K. But let's just use the two facts we've just derived. We know that if we have a bijection, we can reverse the direction of that function. So instead of being a function from K to X, let's make it a function from X to K. So now we're in a situation where we've got a bijection from N to X and a bijection from X to K. But now we know that we can compose these functions together and create the shortcut function that goes directly from N to K. And now let's actually just consider what this means. If we've got a bijection from the N set to the K set it must be the case that n is the same as k, so n equals k. So if we count the elements of x twice and get two different answers, it turns out that those answers must be the same. No, you cannot count the number of elements of a set and get two different answers. How good is this? We'll conclude today by applying what we've learned but in an infinite context. So let's look again at Galileo's paradox, and we will see that it isn't a paradox at all. So if you remember, we lined them up like this and concluded that the set of integers must be larger, but that isn't true. We know now that this function is actually an injection, so a function from the even integers to the integers, assigning each element to its copy in the integers. Every element goes to its own thing, but we don't hit everything in the integers. So it's an injection, but not a bijection. So if it's an injection, then that just means that the collection of integers is greater than or equal to the set of even integers. But then we line them up like this, assigning each integer to its double in the even integers. Or if we want to think about it as a function from the even integers to the integers, then we think about each element being assigned to its half in the integers. And we know that this function is a bijection. Every integer gets hit because there is an even integer that we can half to get to it. And no two elements are mapped to the same thing, because when we half an even number, there's only one answer, so it's an injection. So this is a genuine bijective function, and we said if a bijective function exists between two sets, then they have the same size. So as counterintuitive as this seems, these sets really are equal to each other in size. They are equally infinite. Now this highlights everything that I love about mathematics. From some foundational assumptions, we can go on to create other more complicated and more useful things, all from one simple foundation. And as insurmountable and complicated as a mathematical building sometimes seems, if you take it one brick at a time, it all makes sense. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to subscribe. I've got loads of videos that are up and coming, and I don't want you to miss them, so make sure you subscribe to see all my future content. Also, a huge thank you to the 3 Blue 1 Brown Summer of Maths Exposition community. It's been a really nice atmosphere and a really nice vibe in that community. They've been really helpful in my videos and helping get my channel off the ground, so a huge thank you to those. 3 Blue 1 Brown, if you don't know, they're like a small niche maths YouTube channel. I thought I'd give them a shout out just to give them some much needed attention. Make sure you go check them out. This has been another Proof Under Another Roof. Until next time.